The Mortal Kombat timeline is one of the most convoluted messes in gaming history, spanning gods, demons, tournaments, and multiple reality reboots. From ancient divine wars to a literal fire, God rewriting the universe, Earthrealm has been 5 seconds away from total annihilation more times than anyone can count. So let's break down every major era that shaped this realm, starting with the one that kicked off thousands of years of suffering. The ancient war against Shinnok. Long before any tournament, before Earthrealm even had champions to defend it, the realm was already under attack by one of its supposed protectors. Shinnok was an elder god, a cosmic being tasked with maintaining balance across all realms. But he wanted more than balance. He wanted everything. Shinnok's betrayal wasn't subtle. As the elder god of death and corruption, he launched a full-scale war to conquer Earthrealm and subjugate his fellow gods. His weapon was an amulet he forged himself, one that could bypass the dimensional barriers preventing elder gods from directly interfering with the realms and amplify his divine power. If he kept it, Earthrealm was finished. The only thing standing between Shinnok and total domination was Raiden, the god of thunder and Earthrealm's protector. Raiden appealed to the other elder gods to sanction the rogue deity, turning their own cosmic bureaucracy against him. After a prolonged war, Raiden defeated Shinnok, stripped him of his amulet, and banished him to the Netherrealm, where his powers would be severely weakened. But Raiden didn't destroy Shinnok. He couldn't. So instead, he hid the amulet deep within an Earthrealm temple, guarded by elemental protectors. This wasn't a permanent solution. It was a ticking time bomb. The moment someone retrieved that amulet, Shinnok's return was guaranteed. This ancient war set the rules for everything that followed. It proved that elder gods could fall, that cosmic safeguards could be exploited, and that Earthrealm's survival would always depend on someone being willing to fight gods. Shinnok's banishment seeded the Netherrealm with a fallen god who would spend millennia plotting revenge. The irony is brutal. Earthrealm's continued existence ended up hinging on a Lin Kuei assassin, the Elder Sub-Zero, hired by Quan Chi, retrieving that amulet centuries later before Shinnok could reclaim it. But if you think one rogue god was bad, wait until you see what happens when Earthrealm gets dragged into a tournament designed to legally justify its own conquest. The Great Kung Lao era, before Liu Kang, before Raiden's desperate time message, before any of the chaos you know, there was another champion, the Great Kung Lao. And if you've never heard of him, that's exactly the problem. The Great Kung Lao was Earthrealm's greatest warrior for his generation. He defeated Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat, breaking Outworld's momentum and earning the title of Grand Champion. For a time, he was the symbol of everything Earthrealm could be: disciplined, powerful, unstoppable. But then came Goro. The four-armed Shokan warrior challenged the Great Kung Lao and didn't just beat him, he ripped his heart out, literally. And with that single kill, Goro began a 9-tournament winning streak that brought Earthrealm to the edge of total annihilation. 9 straight victories. 9 generations of fighters sent to die while Outworld crept closer to the legal right to invade and merge the realms. The Great Kung Lao's death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a structural catastrophe. His loss locked Earthrealm into centuries of desperation, with every subsequent generation inheriting a deficit they didn't create and couldn't escape. The White Lotus Society kept training warriors, kept sending them to die, and kept losing, all because one champion fell. And here's the kicker: nobody remembers him. His descendant, Kung Lao, spends his entire life in Liu Kang's shadow. But the Great Kung Lao himself is overshadowed by his own legacy. He's a name whispered in Shaolin temples, a cautionary tale about what happens when Earthrealm's best isn't good enough. Even fire god Liu Kang, when he rewrites the timeline, ensures his descendant receives proper training and recognition, as if trying to retroactively honor what the Great Kung Lao never got. But in the original timeline, there was no second chance. Just a dead champion, a grieving realm, and Goro standing over his body, starting a winning streak that would define Earthrealm's darkest age. At least the Great Kung Lao died fighting for his realm. The warriors who came after him had to fight knowing they were inheriting a war they'd already lost 9 times in a row. The 10th Mortal Kombat tournament. By the time the 10th tournament rolled around, Earthrealm was 1 loss away from complete annihilation. Goro had won 9 straight tournaments for Outworld, ripping through every champion the realm could throw at him for 500 years. The Great Kung Lao's death had kicked off a losing streak so catastrophic that Earthrealm's martial orders were running on fumes and prayer. One more loss and Shao Kahn would have the legal right to merge Earthrealm with Outworld, turning the entire planet into another conquered province in his empire. Enter Liu Kang, a Shaolin monk from the White Lotus Society, who showed up with exactly zero political backing and a belief that he could restore balance. No army, no divine powers, just a guy who was really good at kicking people in the face and an unshakable conviction that Earthrealm was worth saving. He was joined by Johnny Cage, a Hollywood martial artist trying to prove his skills were real, and Sonya Blade, a special forces officer who was technically there to arrest a criminal, but ended up fighting for the fate of the world instead. Raiden descended in mortal form to guide them, but he couldn't fight directly without violating the tournament's rules. Shang Tsung hosted the tournament on a remote island, and his plan was brutally simple: let Goro crush everyone, then finish off whoever was left standing. The sorcerer had been stealing souls for centuries to extend his own life, and he had every reason to believe this would be the easiest win in Outworld's long campaign. But Liu Kang tore through the bracket, defeated Goro in a fight that should have been impossible, and then faced Shang Tsung himself in the final match. When Liu Kang won, he didn't just break Outworld's 9-tournament streak, he completely collapsed their entire legal strategy. The island crumbled, Shang Tsung fled, and Earthrealm walked away with the narrowest possible margin of survival. Liu Kang's victory didn't fix anything long-term, it bought time. Shao Kahn wasn't going to sit back and wait another 500 years to try again. But for that one moment, Earthrealm had a champion again. A human being, not a god, standing between his realm and total annihilation and somehow pulling it off. But if you think one tournament win was going to stop Shao Kahn, you're about to see exactly how far an emperor will go when the rules stop working in his favor. Shao Kahn losing the 10th tournament should have been the end of it. Earthrealm was safe, the Elder Gods' rules were clear, and Outworld had no legal path forward. But Shao Kahn didn't become the conqueror of worlds by following the rules. Instead of waiting another 500 years, he found a loophole, and it involved a dead queen. Sindel, the former ruler of Edenia, had killed herself centuries earlier rather than live under Shao Kahn's rule. Her soul was bound to Earthrealm as a protective ward, a metaphysical barrier keeping Outworld from just walking in. But if Sindel could be resurrected on Earth, Shao Kahn could claim he was reclaiming his property. The Elder God's own rules would let him cross over to retrieve her, and once he was there, he'd already be inside. So that's exactly what he did. With Quan Chi's help, Sindel was brought back to life, her mind twisted and bound to Shao Kahn's will. The moment she drew breath on Earthrealm's soil, the ward dissolved. Outworld's armies poured through portals across the planet. This wasn't a tournament. This was an illegal, full-scale invasion. Cities were overrun. Outworld's forces merged entire sections of Earth with their own realm, warping the landscape into a nightmarish hybrid. Earthrealm's champions, the Special Forces, and Raiden fought desperately to hold the line, but they were massively outnumbered. The worst part? Shao Kahn knew exactly what he was doing. He was daring the Elder Gods to intervene, and for the longest time, they didn't. But here's the thing about breaking cosmic law on that scale. Eventually, the gods have to do something. When Shao Kahn's invasion became so blatant that even the Elder Gods couldn't ignore it anymore, they finally acted. They empowered Raiden with enough divine energy to obliterate Shao Kahn on the spot, vaporizing him in a single strike and forcing Outworld's armies to retreat. Earthrealm survived, barely, but the cost was catastrophic. Sindel, still under Quan Chi's control, had slaughtered a massive number of Earthrealm's defenders before Khan's defeat. Their souls were claimed by Quan Chi, turned into revenants, and dragged to the Netherrealm. And Raiden? He learned a very dangerous lesson. The Elder Gods will only step in after the damage is done. But if you think one rogue emperor and a mass resurrection were bad, wait until you hear about the fallen Elder God who tried to poison Earthrealm's life force from the inside out. The Shinnok Netherrealm War. Shinnok's return should have been impossible. Raiden locked him in the Netherrealm, hid his amulet in a temple guarded by elemental forces, and assumed that would be enough. Turns out, no. The fallen Elder God escaped, reclaimed his amulet, and immediately set his sights on Earthrealm's Jinsei, the literal fountain of life energy that keeps the realm from collapsing into dust. If he corrupted it, Earthrealm would rot from the inside out. Here's where it gets interesting. The old guard who saved Earthrealm during the tournament era were dead. Worse, Quan Chi had turned fighters like Liu Kang and Kung Lao into revenants, undead servants who now fought against their former allies. Earthrealm's greatest champions were literally weaponized against it. Raiden was still around, but increasingly unhinged and burdened by guilt. The realm needed new defenders. Enter Cassie Cage, daughter of Johnny Cage and Sonya Blade, leading a squad that included Jackie Briggs, Takeda, and Kung Jin. They weren't seasoned tournament veterans. They were military operatives who grew up hearing stories about Outworld invasions, and now they had to live through one themselves. When Shinnok invaded the Sky Temple, took Raiden hostage, and began corrupting the Jinsei, it fell to this new generation to stop him, and they did, with Cassie delivering the decisive blow using the same mysterious green energy that once allowed her father to defeat Shinnok years earlier. But Shinnok's defeat came at a cost. Raiden, traumatized by centuries of failure and the loss of so many allies, decided he was done playing defense. He decapitated Shinnok, sealed the god's still-living head in his own amulet, and began torturing him in the Jinsei chamber as a warning to anyone else who threatened Earthrealm. Dark Raiden was born, a protector so ruthless that he would eventually provoke the attention of an even greater cosmic power. At least Earthrealm survived the Netherrealm War, unlike the timeline Raiden was about to break. The Raiden revised timeline crisis. Raiden's message to himself was supposed to save everyone. Instead, it made everything worse. At the end of Armageddon, with nearly every fighter dead and Shao Kahn moments from final victory, Raiden sent a desperate message back in time. He must win. 3 words. Zero context. And that vague, cryptic nonsense became the foundation for an entire alternate timeline, in which Raiden tried to outsmart fate and ended up killing more of his own allies than any enemy ever did. The younger Raiden starts receiving visions of disaster, flashes of deaths, betrayals, catastrophes he doesn't understand. He interprets he must win as referring to Liu Kang's victory in the first tournament, so he changes small decisions, alters who fights whom, tries to steer events away from the original timeline's tragedies. But every time he intervenes, the butterfly effect kicks in, Liu Kang wins the tournament, but things diverge in worse directions. Sindel gets resurrected, dissolves Earthrealm's protective ward, and Shao Kahn invades anyway. The worst moment comes during the invasion. Sindel massacres a huge group of Earthrealm's defenders in a single sequence. Kitana, Jax, Stryker, Sub-Zero, Cabal, Smoke, Jade, all slaughtered. Their souls are immediately claimed by Quan Chi and turned into revenants, undead servants of the Netherrealm. Raiden realizes too late that he must win didn't mean Liu Kang at all. It meant Shao Kahn. Raiden was supposed to let Kahn break the rules so egregiously that the Elder Gods would intervene and destroy him. But by the time Raiden figures this out, half his allies are dead or corrupted. And then there's Liu Kang himself. Appalled by Raiden's decisions and the deaths they caused, Liu Kang attacks him. Raiden, panicking, accidentally kills him with his own lightning, Earthrealm's greatest champion. Dead by friendly fire because his mentor couldn't interpret a 3-word text message from his future self. The altered timeline succeeds in that Armageddon is averted and Shao Kahn is destroyed, but the cost is catastrophic. More heroes are dead, more are enslaved as revenants. Raiden is traumatized, guilt-ridden, and increasingly authoritarian. By the time he defeats Shinnok, he's so far gone that he decapitates the fallen Elder God and tortures him, taunting him with threats of annihilation. Dark Raiden emerges as a broken protector who decided that mercy was a luxury Earthrealm couldn't afford. But if you think one god's temporal crisis was bad, wait until you see what happens when Earthrealm's fallen champions return as undead warlords and Outworld tears itself apart in a civil war that drags everyone into the Netherrealm's orbit. The Outworld, civil war, and revenant threat. While Earthrealm was busy dealing with Shinnok, Outworld was tearing itself apart. Shao Kahn was dead, and the power vacuum turned the realm into a war zone. Kotal Kahn, an Oshtek warrior empowered by literal sunlight, seized the throne. But Mileena, Shao Kahn's clone daughter, wasn't about to let some solar-powered upstart take what she believed was hers by blood. The result was a brutal civil war that fractured Outworld into competing factions. Earthrealm couldn't just ignore this. A divided Outworld meant unpredictable alliances, desperate leaders making reckless moves, and the constant risk of being dragged into someone else's war. Kotal Kahn reached out to Earthrealm for support, forming uneasy truces that served both sides but trusted neither. And then there was Devora, a chitin insectoid who betrayed literally everyone, including delivering Shinnok's amulet to Quan Chi and setting the entire Netherrealm war in motion. But the real nightmare for Earthrealm wasn't Outworld's power, it was the Revenants. Quan Chi had harvested the souls of fallen Earthrealm heroes and turned them into undead servants of the Netherrealm. Liu Kang, Kung Lao, Kitana, Sindel, Jax, and others were now twisted, corrupted versions of themselves, fighting against their former allies. These weren't random enemies. These were Earthrealm's greatest champions, weaponized as shock troops for Shinnok's army. Cassie Cage and her team finally turned the tide. During Shinnok's assault on the Sky Temple, when he was corrupting the Jinsei, Cassie tapped into the same mysterious green energy her father Johnny Cage had used years earlier. She defeated Shinnok, purified the Jinsei, and saved Earthrealm. It was a generational shift. The old guard had been decimated or turned into revenants, and now the younger fighters were stepping up. But even that victory came with a cost. Raiden, traumatized by years of failure, decapitated Shinnok and began torturing him in the Jinsei chamber, adopting a darker, more ruthless persona. Dark Raiden was a fundamental shift in Earthrealm strategy, one that would have consequences no one saw coming. Kronika's time merger crisis. After centuries of meddling, invasions, and desperate gambles, time itself finally broke. And the person who broke it was a titaness named Kronika, the Keeper of Time, who decided that Raiden had screwed up the cosmic balance so badly that the only solution was to erase everything and start over. Here's the thing. Kronika wasn't some random villain. She was the mother of Shinnok and Cetrion, a being higher than the Elder Gods, and she'd been watching Earthrealm's timeline unfold for eons. When Dark Raiden decapitated her son, she decided enough was enough. The balance between good and evil had tipped too far, and her solution was to rewind history, merge different eras together, and craft a new era where Raiden's influence was completely removed. Her plan was as insane as it sounds. Using the Hourglass, a cosmic device that controls all of time, Kronika began pulling past and present versions of fighters into the same moment. Younger Liu Kang met older Liu Kang. Past Raiden stood alongside his corrupted future self. Warriors who had died decades ago suddenly found themselves fighting next to people who hadn't been born yet. She even created Geras, an immortal construct who could manipulate time on a smaller scale, resurrecting himself endlessly and reversing his own injuries mid-combat. The entire multiverse became a blended battlefield where nothing was stable and no one knew which version of history was real anymore. But here's where it gets complicated. Raiden realized that Kronika had done this before, many times, resetting the timeline over and over in search of perfection. Every inconsistency, every retcon, every weird shift across the games, all of it was the result of her cosmic tinkering. Faced with this, Raiden made a final, desperate choice. He merged his essence with Liu Kang, elevating his former student to Fire God and passing the mantle of Earthrealm's protector to the one person who had earned it through every timeline. Fire. God Liu Kang then confronted Kronika at the Hourglass in a battle that would decide the shape of all future realities. When he won, he didn't just repair the timeline, he rewrote it from scratch, crafting a new era where the threats that had plagued Earthrealm for centuries could be diffused before they ever arose. At least that was the plan. But when you're dealing with a multiverse, peace is never guaranteed. Fire. God Liu Kang's new era. Peace. Liu Kang won. He killed Kronika, erased Shang Tsung, and took control of the Hourglass. And then he did something no one else in Mortal Kombat history had ever done. He sat down and actually designed a better timeline. Not a perfect one, better. He reshaped history from the ground up. Raiden became mortal. Shang Tsung became a nobody. Sub-Zero and Scorpion became brothers. Liu Kang trained the great Kung Lao himself, closing a loop that had been open for centuries. He neutralized threats before they could arise, adjusted relationships, and gave everyone a real shot at peace. For the first time in Earthrealm's entire history, the Mortal Kombat tournament wasn't a prelude to invasion. It was just a tournament, and for a while, it worked. But here's the thing about rewriting reality. You can't account for every timeline. Liu Kang built his new era to be stable, but he couldn't stop other versions of his enemies from breaking in. Titan Shang Tsung survived in another timeline and started manipulating events under the alias Damashi. Titan Havoc, a chaos god from yet another reality, decided Liu Kang's peace was boring and tried to reshape the multiverse into anarchist madness. Earthrealm went from facing one Shao Kahn to facing infinite variants of every threat it had ever known. Liu Kang's new era isn't the end of Earthrealm's story. It's just the first chapter written by someone who actually lived through all the previous disasters. He's a god now, but he's still the same monk who died fighting Raiden, who became a revenant, who merged with Thunder itself and rewrote time. He knows exactly how fragile peace is, because he's seen it collapse a dozen different ways. The promise of this timeline isn't that Earthrealm is finally safe, it's that for once someone who actually cares about it is holding the pen. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.